Imagine loving someone who measures your value not by your heart, but by the jingling weight of your pockets. In the village of Umuse, a young man named Obinna Nwosu carried dreams bigger than his father's worn-out calabash. By day, he tapped palm wine with calloused hands. By night, he whispered to the stars about Aisha Dinladi, the trader's daughter whose laughter could turn silence into melody. He had no gold, no car, no fine clothes, but his heart was as steady as the Irako. And yet, in a world that bows to wealth, love often trips on pride. When Obinna finally gathered courage to speak, his words trembled like the morning dew. "Aisha," he said, "I may not have riches, but I have vision." She looked at him, her gaze cold as untouched silver. "Vision?" she scoffed. "You cannot feed vision to a woman." Her friends laughed, and something inside Obinna cracked, but did not break. That night, as the moon rose like a witness, he whispered to himself, "If coins decide my worth, then I will forge my own kingdom." Obinna's world smelled of wet earth and fresh palm wine. Every morning before the sun stretched its arms, he climbed the tall raffia trees with a rope tied around his waist, humming tunes that only the birds seemed to understand. His father had taught him that a man's dignity was in his labor, not in the coins he carried. Their hut was small, the roof patched with palm fronds, but laughter often spilled from its corners. Mama Ngozi, their kindly neighbor, would wave him over with roasted yam and tales of patience. To Obinna, life was simple, until he met Aisha Dinladi, the woman whose bracelets jingled like distant thunder. Aisha, daughter of the richest trader in Umuse, lived in a house painted the color of wealth. White walls, tall gates, and servants who bowed even to her shadow. She never fetched water, never walked the dusty road barefoot. Her world glimmered with imported fabrics and city dreams. Yet, when she passed through the market, Obinna's heart would betray him, pounding like a drum at a festival. He saw not her jewels, but her smile. She saw not his spirit, but his poverty. And so began a love destined to be tested by pride and fate. That night, the moon hung low over Umuse, bright enough to turn the river silver. Obinna sat beneath the old Irako tree, waiting. His feet were still muddy from the day's climb, his hands smelling faintly of palm wine. When Aisha appeared, wrapped in a flowing wrapper of blue and gold, it felt as though the night itself had sent her. "Why do you risk being seen with me?" he asked softly. She smiled, that careful smile she used when torn between pride and curiosity. "Because, Obinna," she whispered, "you speak as if you see tomorrow." Under the trembling stars, they shared their dreams. He, of building a workshop in the city. She, of owning a store that reached beyond the village. For a brief moment, hope bridged their worlds. The crickets sang, and the night breeze carried the scent of wet soil. "One day," Obinna said, "I'll return here with my hands full of blessings." Aisha laughed lightly. "Then I'll be here waiting, if your blessings find you first." They sat in silence, the kind that only hearts understand, their fingers brushing the same patch of earth. But the moon knows what mortals forget. Not every promise made under its light survives the dawn. The morning sun rose with the scent of market spice and gossip. Obinna had spent weeks saving every coin, polishing his words like a craftsman shaping wood. He walked to Aisha's house dressed in his cleanest shirt, carrying a small calabash of palm wine, a humble token of love and respect. When the gate opened, he found her seated beneath the veranda, her hair braided with golden beads, her friends whispering like wind through dry leaves. "Aisha," he began, voice trembling, "I have little today, but I promise you, I am building something greater than wealth. Walk with me through the struggle." Aisha's laughter was sharp, slicing through his hope. She stood, eyes cold and unyielding. "Walk with you? To where?" "The forest where your bare feet belong." Her words struck harder than any slap. "You will never belong in my world. Obina. Go back to your trees. Her friends cackled as he stood frozen, his heart bleeding behind a brave smile. Without another word, he turned away, each step heavier than the last. The dust rose behind him, blurring his path. Yet in that cloud of shame, a seed was planted, the kind that grows best in pain and silence. Before dawn, when the cock's crow still echoed through Yumyus, Obina packed his few belongings into a worn sack, a faded shirt, his father's wooden carving, and a heart heavy with both grief and fire. The village was quiet, but whispers already traveled faster than the wind. Did you hear? The palm wine tapper's son thought he could marry the trader's daughter. Some laughed, some pitied, but none offered a hand. Mama Ngozi watched from her doorway, her eyes glistening. My son, she called gently. A road filled with dust can still lead to destiny. He bowed to her, too choked to speak. Beyond the village gate, the world stretched wide and unknown, the red soil giving way to the promise of the city. As he walked, the memories clung to him. Aisha's laughter, his father's lessons, the scent of home. Every step felt like peeling away a layer of his old self. He didn't look back, he couldn't. The gate behind him stood like a judge, closing on his past. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a new sun waited, one that would not rise on poverty but on purpose. His bare feet carried him forward, leaving behind shame and planting footprints of resolve. The evening before Obina left Yumyus for good, he returned to the old Irako tree where moonlight had once witnessed his tender hopes. The air was heavy with memories. The same branches that had sheltered his laughter now rustled with quiet farewell. He placed his hand on the rough bark and whispered, I came here once with love in my heart and mud on my feet. I leave now with the same heart, but a different fire. The stars blinked above him as if listening. He knelt, pressed his palm into the soil and vowed, I will return, not to boast or to shame, but to prove that a man's worth is not measured by coins, but by what he becomes when the world counts him out. Behind him, the wind carried faint echoes of the village, the chatter, the clanging pots, the laughter that no longer welcomed him. Yet, in that loneliness bloomed a strange calm. The Irako creaked softly, like an elder giving its blessing. When I return, Obina said, standing tall, my hands will build, not destroy. With that, he turned toward the distant lights of Eco Nova, the city that would test his promise and shape his destiny. When Obina first stepped into Eco Nova, the air felt alive, thick with heat, noise, and endless motion. Cars honked like angry geese, traders shouted over each other, and the scent of roasted corn mingled with exhaust fumes. The city glittered with opportunity but spoke a language his village heart did not yet understand. He wandered through crowded streets clutching his small sack, eyes wide with wonder and fear. Everywhere he turned, people hurried as if chased by time itself. Here, a bus conductor barked, no slow man survives. Obina smiled faintly, he had survived worse. But by nightfall, when the city lights replaced the stars, he found himself with no bed, no friend, and barely enough coins for a meal. He slept on a wooden bench beneath a flickering street lamp, the ground humming with passing footsteps. The city did not care who you were. It only respected what you could offer. Yet even as hunger gnawed and fatigue pressed heavy on his eyes, Obina's heart whispered the vow made under the Irako tree. I did not come this far to break, he murmured. Above him, a distant plane crossed the sky like a moving star, proof that even dust could rise. The nights in Eco Nova were colder than Obina had imagined, the wind cutting through his thin shirt like the sharp edges of his doubts. He huddled beneath a flickering streetlight that buzzed and sputtered, casting more shadows than light. The smell of burnt charcoal and fried plantains mixed with the stench of the alley, reminding him that the city was both alive and indifferent. Hunger twisted his stomach, and the ache of longing for Yumyus pressed heavy on his chest. Around him, people passed without notice. Rich merchants, hurried laborers, and children darting past with small hands clutching scraps. He was invisible, yet painfully aware of every coinless moment, every mocking glance of a world that demanded proof of worth. Obinna pressed his forehead to his knees and whispered into the night, "Is this my destiny?" His voice trembled, but a quiet ember of hope glowed within him, born from the vow beneath the Irako tree. He remembered Mama Ngozi's gentle smile, his father's lessons, and even Aisha's cruel rejection. Each a spark, each a weight. Though rock bottom pressed hard, he realized that the soil of despair could grow strength. Somewhere in the distance, a market light flickered, and with it, the first hint of opportunity. Tomorrow, he promised himself, he would rise. On the third day of wandering through the maze of Eco Nova, Obinna stumbled into a small workshop tucked between towering concrete buildings. The air smelled of sawdust, oil, and possibility. Behind a worn workbench stood Baba Kunal Adeyemi, a man whose eyes seemed to carry the patience of centuries. His hands were thick and scarred, moving with the precision of someone who had carved not just wood, but life itself. "You look lost, boy," he said, voice gravelly but warm. Obinna nodded, ashamed but desperate. "I need work," he admitted. Baba Kunal studied him, then smiled faintly. "Work is nothing if it does not teach. Stay, and I will show you not just how to carve wood, but how to carve yourself." The apprenticeship began at sunrise. Obinna's fingers bled, and splinters pricked his palms. But with every stroke of the chisel, he learned more than craft. He learned patience, discipline, and the rhythm of persistence. Baba Kunal spoke in proverbs as he worked, "The tree that bends will survive the storm." By night, Obinna's muscles ached, but his spirit stirred with a new strength. For the first time since leaving Umuse, he felt that perhaps poverty had not defined him. Yet, the workshop, small and crowded, became a sanctuary where failure was not an enemy, but a teacher. Days turned into weeks, and Obinna's hands hardened like the seasoned wood he worked. Under Baba Kunal's watchful eyes, he carved stools, doors, and intricate figurines that seemed to hum with life. At first, his fingers fumbled, splinters biting, mistakes piling like fallen leaves. But with every stroke, every corrected cut, he remembered the Irako tree and the vow he had whispered into the soil of Umuse. "The hand that learns never starves," Baba Kunal reminded him one evening, as they wiped sawdust from their foreheads. And slowly, the truth of those words sank in. A local merchant bought Obinna's first small stool, and then a door, and soon the workshop echoed with the rhythm of coins clinking where none had existed before. With each sale, Obinna's confidence swelled. Yet he stayed humble, remembering the streets, the hunger, and the nights beneath broken streetlights. The city, once indifferent, began to notice him, not as a poor boy, but as a craftsman whose work carried soul. He sent a few coins home to Mama Ngozi, laughing quietly to himself at the thought of Aisha, whose world had dismissed him. In every groove he carved into wood, a piece of his resolve deepened. In every satisfied customer, a spark of destiny ignited. Obinna was no longer invisible, he was rising. Back in Umuse, Aisha Dinladi moved through her life wrapped in silk and gold, but each step was hollow. The trader's house was grand, filled with laughter, servants, and the constant hum of commerce, yet her nights were silent. She lay awake, staring at ceilings that had never known the warmth of humility or struggle. The city life she had dreamed of now enclosed her like a cage of shiny bars, and every smile in the mirror reflected not pride, but unease. Her friends praised her beauty and status, yet whispered behind her back about her coldness. And in the quiet corners of her heart, a shadow lingered, the faint echo of a boy with muddy feet and bright eyes, whose love she had dismissed. Aisha tried to bury the memory, telling herself she had chosen wisely. But the ghost of regret is patient. It whispered through the market, through the gossip of villagers returning from the city, and even in the rustle of her silk wrapper. Each mention of Obinna Nwosu, the palm wine tapper's son who left for the city, made her stomach twist. She laughed loudly in company, yet her mind wandered to nights beneath the moon, to promises she had scorned, and to the boy who had vanished beyond the village gate, leaving a wound only success and humility could one day heal. In a quiet corner of Eco Nova, Obinna sat beneath the dim glow of a lantern, quill scratching against rough paper. His heart poured into every word, hopes, dreams, and the faint ache of missing Yumyus. He wrote to Mama Ngozi first, then to his father, and finally, hesitantly, to Aisha. "I do not write to boast or to punish," he penned, "but to tell you that the boy you saw as poor carries more than coins in his pockets. He carries a heart that will never give up." The letter, sealed with care and love, felt heavier than any sack he had carried on his shoulders. He entrusted it to a messenger, who promised swift delivery to the village, yet fate had other plans. Weeks passed, and the letters never arrived. A storm had swept through the village roads, washing away bridges, letters, and even some memories. Obinna only learned of the delay when a weary traveler mentioned seeing a soggy envelope lost in the river. The news struck him like a blow, yet he refused despair. "Words may be delayed, but destiny is not," he murmured, tucking the blank slate of tomorrow into his heart. Though unseen, the letter became a silent witness to his resilience, a promise that his story was only beginning, its impact waiting patiently, like seeds beneath winter soil. One evening, as Obinna and Baba Kunnel locked the workshop and the city lights flickered like fireflies, a stray spark from a passing lantern caught the corner of dry wood. Within moments, flames danced hungrily, devouring every plank, every stool, and every piece of Obinna's fledgling success. Smoke curled into the night sky, thick and suffocating, carrying the scent of dreams turned to ash. Obinna stood frozen, heart pounding, as neighbors rushed to help, but there was little to save. The workshop, once alive with the rhythm of labor and hope, was now a blackened skeleton. Tears burned his eyes, not just for the wood, but for the promise he had nurtured with every waking hour. Baba Kunnel placed a firm hand on his shoulder, eyes steady. "A fire does not break the tree that bends," he said, voice calm as the wind. Obinna sank to his knees, ashes clinging to his hair and clothes, and in that despair, something extraordinary stirred. He remembered the Irako tree, the vow whispered into the soil, the nights beneath broken streetlights, and the hunger that had taught him patience. With trembling hands, he touched the charred beams and whispered, "This is not the end." The fire had destroyed everything, but it could not burn the resolve within him. The morning after the fire, Obinna awoke with soot still clinging to his hair and hands, but a strange clarity had settled over him. The workshop, now a pile of blackened timber and ash, whispered of failure, but also of possibility. Baba Kunnel handed him a fresh block of wood, unmarked and full of potential. "Even clay must break before it becomes pottery, Obinna," he said, his eyes steady. "Every fire, every failure, shapes the hand and the heart. Start again." Obinna nodded, and with each measured stroke of his chisel, he felt the weight of despair lifting, replaced by determination tempered in flame. Neighbors began to notice his persistence. Orders trickled in, modest at first, yet each completed stool, door, and carving carried the resilience of a man who had touched rock bottom and refused to stay there. Obinna worked day and night, muscles sore, fingers raw, yet the fire within him burned brighter than any flame that had consumed his past. With every groove, he whispered to himself, "I am not defined by ashes, but by what I build from them." Slowly, his reputation grew, and so did hope, proof that rebirth often comes from the very trials meant to destroy us. Months of relentless labor finally bore fruit when Obinna secured a small iron stall in one of Eco Nova's bustling markets. The stall, modest and unassuming, was a window to his craft, a place where carved doors, stools, and figurines gleamed like hidden treasures amid the clamor of merchants. Each item told a story, every groove a testament to patience and resilience. Early customers trickled in, curious about the boy who had risen from the streets, and soon word spread. People began traveling from distant corners of the city to see the stall that seemed ordinary at first but held extraordinary craftsmanship. Obina's eyes sparkled as coins began to fill his small tin box, not just for survival, but as markers of a dream finally taking shape. Yet, the miracle was not just in the coins. It was in the recognition and the small nods of respect from strangers who once overlooked him. Baba Kunnal watched quietly from behind, pride etched in his lined face. "You see, Obina," he said one evening, "the world notices those who endure, even when all seems lost." Obina smiled, thinking of the Irako tree, the vow he had whispered, and the fire that had almost destroyed him. The iron stall had become more than a business. It was proof that persistence, faith, and skill could turn dust and struggle into triumph. Word of Obina's success traveled faster than the wind, reaching even the polished gates of the Dinladi household. Aisha returned to Yumu's not with fanfare, but quietly, her carriage rolling along the familiar red earth as if afraid of being noticed. The village whispered behind her back, "The girl who laughed at the palm wine tapper's son has returned." Gone was the confident sway of silk and gold. Her steps were measured, hesitant, almost apologetic. She avoided the familiar market paths and the laughter of old friends, yet every corner reminded her of a boy with muddy feet and unyielding eyes. A boy who had left, but whose memory had grown taller than the tallest mango tree. Inside her home, Aisha stared at her reflection, the jewelry and fine clothes now feeling heavy as chains. Pride had once been her armor, but the news of Obina's iron stall, the city's admiration, and the stories of his resilience struck a quiet chord of regret. She moved through the village silently, eyes downcast, heart weighed by the knowledge that she had misjudged love for wealth. The girl who had once rejected a humble boy now faced the mirror of consequence, realizing that sometimes the world does not wait for permission to teach lessons. By the time Obina's name reached the farthest corners of Yumu's, it no longer carried pity or whispers of failure. The boy who had once walked barefoot beyond the village gate had become a figure of awe. Traders, travelers, and villagers spoke of him in hushed, reverent tones. The young tycoon of Eco Nova, the one who rose from nothing. His iron stall had grown into a workshop bustling with apprentices, the walls humming with the rhythm of skill and ambition. Stories of his resilience spread like wildfire. How he had survived hunger, fire, and heartbreak, and how he had turned each trial into a stepping stone toward greatness. Obina's reputation was no longer a rumor. It was legend, and even the proudest villagers could not ignore it. Back in the village, the air felt different. Gossip had transformed into admiration. Mothers told their children of the boy who refused to bow to shame. Fathers nodded quietly at the lesson of perseverance. Aisha Dinladi, standing at the edge of the market, watched from a distance, heart pounding and silent, as villagers whispered her former laughter into the wind. Obina had become more than a man. He was a symbol, a living proverb, that true worth is measured not by coins, but by courage, patience, and the fire to rise when all seems lost. Months later, the village of Yumu's awakened to an unusual rhythm. The deep, resonant beat of drums echoing through the red earth and narrow lanes. Obina had returned, not as the boy who had left with muddy feet and empty pockets, but as a man whose name carried weight beyond the city gates. His carriage rolled slowly along the main road, polished wood and iron glinting in the sun, flanked by apprentices and workers who had journeyed with him from Eco Nova. Villagers paused mid-task, jaws slack, eyes wide with awe, as whispers turned to murmurs. "Is it really him? The boy we once mocked?" Children ran ahead, pointing and laughing in disbelief, while elders pressed their palms to their chests, sensing the fulfillment of a destiny they had only glimpsed in dreams. Obinna stepped down gracefully, hands folded, eyes sweeping over familiar faces that had once judged him. The air was thick with reverence and wonder, and even the chief Ibrahim Alawu could not mask the flicker of humility in his gaze. There was no boastful cry, no arrogance, only a quiet strength that commanded respect. The drums continued, celebrating more than a man's return. They celebrated resilience, the triumph of heart and labor over scorn and doubt. In that moment, Obinna was both stranger and legend, a living bridge between the village's past and the promise of its future. The Dinladi household, once a fortress of pride and status, now felt unusually small. News of Obinna's return and his thriving business reached even the highest room in the house, where Aisha's father, Chief Ibrahim Alawu, sat stiff-backed in his carved chair. The traders who had once envied him now nodded in quiet admiration toward the boy he had scorned. The villagers whispered in the market and on dusty paths, "Even the proudest must recognize true worth." Pride, which had fortified the family for years, now trembled under the weight of reality. Aisha's mother clutched her shawl, eyes downcast, sensing that their daughter's world of glitter and gold could no longer shield them from humility. When Obinna passed by their gate, his calm presence contrasted sharply with the tension inside. No anger or vindictiveness came from his lips, yet the sheer magnitude of his success spoke louder than any words. Chief Ibrahim bowed his head subtly, an acknowledgement of the boy he once dismissed. The family felt the sting of lessons long overdue, that wealth without integrity is empty, that status without kindness is hollow, and that pride, when faced with perseverance and character, must eventually bend. Obinna's return had transformed not only him, but the perspective of an entire household steeped in ego. Obinna stood beneath the Irako tree once more, the same tree that had witnessed his first vow years ago. The villagers gathered around, eyes wide with curiosity and a mix of awe and guilt. They watched him speak softly, not to condemn, but to reflect. "I came back not to punish, not to gloat. I returned to show that a man's worth is measured in deeds, not in coins or scorn. And now I ask you, if you were in my shoes, what would you do?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fading fire, and every villager felt the weight of their own choices. Mothers and fathers exchanged glances. Even children felt the pull of morality, wondering if pride or forgiveness would guide them in the same situation. The air was alive with whispers, debates, and silent reflection. Some nodded, imagining themselves walking through the city streets with nothing but hope. Others clenched their jaws, considering the sting of betrayal and rejection. Obinna smiled faintly, letting them sit in that tension, for he knew that true lessons are not spoken, they are felt. The moment was not just about him or Aisha. It was a mirror for every heart present. And as the sun dipped low, painting the village gold, the moral became clear. Life asks us daily, if you were in his shoes, what would you do? Obinna's homecoming was celebrated not with pomp, but with a feast that surprised the entire village. Long wooden tables were set under the sprawling Irako tree, laden with roasted yams, fresh fish, and bowls of palm soup that sent scents drifting through the red earth. Villagers arrived cautiously, unsure whether to expect pride or vengeance. But Obinna welcomed each one with a calm smile and a hand extended in friendship. Even Aisha, dressed simply yet elegantly, approached slowly, her head bowed. "I did not come to punish," Obinna said, voice carrying across the gathering. "Tonight, we celebrate not just success, but unity, grace, and the lessons that brought us here." As laughter and chatter replaced whispers and doubts, hearts began to soften. The elders shared stories of resilience, mothers nodded with relief, and children danced with unbridled joy. Forgiveness flowed like the palm wine poured into clay cups, abundant and warm. Aisha met Obinna's gaze, And in that quiet exchange, a bridge was rebuilt over years of pride and pain. The village, once divided by judgment and wealth, found harmony under the same tree that had witnessed vows and dreams. Obina's feast was more than food. It was a lesson in mercy, a demonstration that true strength lies not in holding grudges, but in opening one's heart to reconciliation. After the feast, the villagers lingered, some sitting in quiet reflection beneath the sprawling branches of the Irako tree. Obina walked slowly to the spot where, years ago, he had knelt and whispered his vow into the soil. Memories of rejection, hunger, fire, and relentless effort coursed through him, and for the first time in years, he allowed his heart to release the weight it had carried alone. Tears welled and fell freely, not from pain, but from the deep relief of fulfillment. Mama Ngozi placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, whispering, "You have honored your heart and your journey, Obina." Around him, villagers watched quietly, sensing that this moment was more than personal. It was a reflection of life's fragile beauty and the power of perseverance. Aisha approached, kneeling beside him, her own eyes glistening with regret and newfound humility. She reached out, placing her hand lightly over his, a silent plea for forgiveness and understanding. Obina did not speak. He let the tears, the silence, and the shared history convey what words could not. The Irako tree stood witness once again, its branches casting long shadows that mingled with hope and redemption. In that quiet evening, both lives mirrored each other. The boy who had risen and the girl who had learned the weight of pride, demonstrating that true strength lies in the courage to forgive and the grace to rebuild bonds once broken. With his business thriving and his heart steady, Obina looked beyond personal triumph to the village that had shaped him. He purchased plots of land along the main road of Yumyus, not for profit, but for purpose. Where once villagers had whispered and laughed at his muddy feet, he now built a school, a small clinic, and a communal market stall for struggling families. The village watched in disbelief as the boy they had dismissed transformed into a benefactor whose generosity carried no bitterness. Even the children, who had once played at mocking him, ran freely in spaces created from his success, learning lessons of both skill and humility. Obina's gifts were quiet yet profound. He gave without expectation, his hands opening to lift others even as he stood taller than ever. Aisha, observing from a distance, felt a mixture of awe and shame. She saw families she knew personally receive help, watched elders nod in gratitude, and realized that true wealth was measured not by coins, but by the lives it touched. Chief Ibrahim Alawu bowed deeply, acknowledging the boy he had once scorned. Obina smiled, not with pride, but with the satisfaction of seeing wounds heal through action rather than words. The land he gifted back became more than soil and structures. It became a testament to the power of mercy, vision, and a heart willing to rise above insult and scarcity to nurture a community that had once doubted him. Obina sat on the steps of the new community hall, the sun dipping low over Yumyus, painting the village in golden hues. Around him, laughter and life flourished, proof that the years of struggle had not been in vain. He reflected on the journey, the rejection, the hunger, the fire that consumed his first workshop, and the nights of doubt beneath broken streetlights. Each trial had been a lesson, each failure a teacher, yet the one he carried longest in his heart had been bitterness. He realized, with quiet clarity, that holding on to anger toward Aisha or the villagers would have chained him forever, keeping him tethered to the past instead of propelling him forward. Bitterness is a chain the heart wears willingly, he murmured to himself, eyes scanning the thriving marketplace and the children playing under the Irako tree, free and unburdened. Aisha approached, offering a tentative smile. "I see now," she said softly, "how heavy my pride once was." Obina nodded, not with judgment, but with the calm authority of someone who had learned that forgiveness frees both giver and receiver. In that moment, the village understood the greatest lesson of all, that pain and insult need not define a life, and that a heart willing to let go can turn even wounds into wings. Obinna had risen not only above poverty, but above resentment, leaving a legacy that would ripple through Umuse for generations. Years had passed, and Umuse was unrecognizable, not in its red earth or narrow paths, but in the spirit of its people. Where whispers of scorn once lingered, laughter and cooperation now filled the air. The school Obinna had built echoed with the voices of children learning not just reading and numbers, but lessons of resilience and kindness. The market bustled with commerce, fair and vibrant, and even the elders moved with a quiet pride, acknowledging the transformation their village had undergone. Obinna walked among them, no longer the boy with muddy feet, but a man whose journey had uplifted not only himself, but the entire community. The Irako tree stood tall, a silent witness to vows kept, lessons learned, and hearts healed. As villagers gathered beneath its branches for the annual harvest festival, Obinna addressed them with calm strength. "Remember this," he said, voice carrying like the wind through the village paths, "that wealth without compassion is hollow, pride without humility is fragile, and every heart carries the choice to forgive or to remain chained. Umuse has risen because its people chose to lift one another, and you, too, carry that power in your hands. If you were in Obinna's shoes, how would you rise from your trials? Comment below. Your story is waiting to be written. Thank you for watching through. Hey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, please help our channel grow. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story.